In this video, we're going to learn about a little thing called a production quota. Before we get started, I want to talk about the terminology and a little bit about how production quotas tend to be implemented. Oftentimes, the word that indicates we're using a production quota is the word allotment, meaning that a farmer will be given an amount that they're allowed to grow. You are allotted a certain amount that you can produce on your farm. And there are several other ways that we could work this. You might, for example, limit the amount that a farmer could plant. You can only have a certain number of acres of a product, or you can only grow a certain amount. I remember back in the day when I was a kid growing up on a farm, we had a tobacco quota. Our farm could grow a certain number of pounds of tobacco and then turn around and sell it. So we had a tobacco allotment that was tied to our piece of property, and if we sold that piece of property, whoever bought it would have that same allotment. And these are used in order to control production. And by doing that, you're able to keep prices high. You can put upward pressure on price by limiting the amount that farmers can grow. And oftentimes these allotments, these production quotas, were tied to some other policy. If you want to get your non-recourse marketing loan, if you want to get your deficiency payment, if you want to get some guaranteed price out in the marketplace, you've got to limit how much you produce. These are tied together in so many different ways. But let's just jump right into this. Let me move my face out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. This should be getting predictable by now. Every time we do one of these policies, we're going to draw a diagram with supply and demand curves, and we're going to talk about how this works. There's a demand curve, there's a supply curve, and we have an equilibrium price. PE. And as I've been saying all along, we start to take this picture right here, and this is positive economics. We have a thing that's going on. That's the real world. That's the way the world actually is. This is reality. There's the price. There's the quantity. It's all right there in front of us. And someone says, I don't like reality. Reality does not match the way I want the world to be. And that person could be a farmer. That person could be anybody in the process. And lobbying takes place and laws get passed, and someone says the way the world should be is the price should be higher. Dr. Gardner, growing up as a kid on a farm, should get a higher price for their tobacco they grow. And in this case, we're going to ensure the higher price by creating a production quota, and we're going to have a limit. We're going to call that QQ. So that QQ is the amount that we're going to limit total production to inside the entire nation. And we draw a dotted line straight up, and that dotted line straight up indicates the amount that can be grown. And here's where things get kind of interesting. Let me change colors again. So basically, when you're operating below the quota, the production quota, the amount that farmers grow follows the supply curve. The law of supply works at that point until you hit the quota. And then at any other price, the farmer no longer responds to the price incentive. The law of supply basically breaks at this point. And then that quota line becomes the effective supply curve. So we're going to draw a supply curve right here. We're going to label it supply curve number 2. In essence, we have taken our normal market supply curve that was functioning as we would expect it to do, and we've taken it apart. And what we end up having is a situation where at this point right here, this is the price, we're going to call it PQ, where the Q stands for quota, that's going to be in place when the quota happens. Basically, we pulled the supply curve back and forced the economy to operate at this higher price, or forced the market to operate at this higher price. And that's the basic concept of a production quota. We put an upward pressure on price. Now, the interesting thing about a production quota is there's zero taxpayer costs associated with a production quota, well, other than the cost of administering the program, but that's a common thing in all of these programs. You got to pay people to go out and do the work of the administering the quota. But there's no cost attributable to the market here. There's no tax revenue or tax cost in this marketplace. So all we really have are changes in producer and consumer surplus. And this is a little bit tricky and kind of hard to prove and show sometimes, But what I want to do is I want to call your attention to three areas: Area A, Area B, and Area C. So these are the three areas that are of interest to us, and what I hope that you will notice is that our consumer is paying more for the product and they're getting less of it, which means they've lost out. They've got a decrease in consumer surplus. And the decrease in consumer surplus is going to be equal to areas A and B, not unlike some of the other policies we've seen where the consumer is made worse off. If you want to see it on the diagram here, it's right here. Bounded by the demand curve, the height is the two prices. So our consumer is losing area A and B. Now the producer is a little bit more complicated to show, but what in essence has happened is the producer, let me switch to a different color here. Let's go with this color, kind of a lime green. The producer gained this area right here. This is extra revenue the producer brought in, but in the process lost this area here, area C. And so the change in producer surplus is equal to the rectangle that they gained. They picked up that rectangle. They basically took that rectangle from our consumers, minus that little triangle right there. And what's interesting about this is the farmer isn't stupid. The farmer looks at this and says, at this higher price, I wish I could have planted more, right? They would have gone out to the supply curve out here, right? And so the farmer inherently knows that there's something wrong with this scenario, that they're losing something in the process because they want to produce more, but the law keeps them from doing it. They're looking at that high price and they're saying, I really wish I could plant more of whatever. And we can see it clearly in the diagram. The farmer flat out loses that area C. And what's interesting to this, as long as area A is bigger than area C, the farmer is net better off when there's a production quota in place because that quota basically is going to make them some extra money. We actually have a name for that extra money. We call it quota rent. And we might call it policy rent. In essence, the farmer is getting extra money simply because the quota is in place, which is why the quota is in place. The whole purpose behind this is because society believes the farmer doesn't make enough money. Now let's take a look at the deadweight loss. The deadweight loss is going to be equal to, well, it's just going to be canceling these things out and taking the absolute value of them. We have a negative A here and a positive A here, right? And so the farmer and the consumer offset each other, and what we're left with is this negative B and this negative C. So the deadweight loss is equal to the absolute value of the negative C plus B. In other words, the deadweight loss is area B and area C combined together, and that is our deadweight loss. And that is the essence of how a production quota works. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.